Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are, and thank you for joining me on the Roaming Prepper channel. Once again, we're going to do a travel series video on somewhere historic, and I picked some of these places specifically not just because of the historical value, but also because of the value for preparedness and also societal understanding and historical context. All these things are interwoven, they're all meshed together, if you will. If you have a society that understands the mistakes and the good things it's done in the past, it's apt to do better in the future. When we start to erase our past because it offends, because by today's standards it's not acceptable, but we don't understand the good and bad and the ugly of what happened, we lose as a society. So I'll be right back and let's talk more about this particular venue that I visited that reflects some technology and science and the way people were over 100 years ago. I'll be right back and we'll do that. Welcome back, everyone, and thank you for joining me once again on the Roaming Prepper channel. Again, don't forget to like and subscribe. I normally will premiere a video like this, and I will be in the premiere. Sometimes I don't make my own premieres, so by all means, if I'm not in my own premiere, feel free to leave a comment or a question below. We're going to talk more about this historical place that reflects the commitment of workers and settlers back in the 1800s. The place I'm talking about is the Temple Railroad Museum in Temple, Texas. Those of you not familiar with Temple, Texas, it's a beautiful town, actually a small city, located kind of in the central part of Texas. It's in the hill country, it's green, it's pretty, folks are nice, and the food's kind of good, and there's a lot of small shops and places where you can actually go and shop and meet other people. So it's actually pretty cool. When you get there, you get to the museum. It's actually part of what used to be an old railroad station or a cross station. Now, a lot of people don't realize that Temple, Texas, back in the 1800s, was where multiple trains intersected coming from Dallas and Fort Worth, from the stockyards, which will be another video, from Houston, from Galveston, from El Paso, from the north, from the northwest. All those trains would intersect in the Temple area. And so Temple was known for its railroads and its railroad infrastructure, and hence why the museum is there. Now, the museum itself is beautiful. It was an old railroad station back in the day, and it was also a thoroughfare. There were stores. It was rather the place to be back then. When you walk into the facility, the first thing you see is the front end mock-up of an old steam engine. And this just speaks to the way things were back then. These were steam engines that were built entirely by hand by machinists, metalsmiths, blacksmiths, the engineers of the day, building these machines to transport goods, people, and cattle to and from a variety of places. Now, one of the things you do notice as you walk into the main part of the museum is the history that's in front of you. They had everything from manual rail cars, which you've seen in cartoons where you use the plungers to kind of make the car go, as well as the uniforms of the day, as well as the symbols and signs, which is very interesting because we've become so dependent on electronics. Most of us don't know Morse code. Most of us don't know what the different lights and semaphores mean on the train tracks and how they can be used in other emergency situations. So just being able to witness that was very cool. They did have a display of clothing of the time, and I will tell you everything was handmade. There was no machine-made stuff like we wear today. The shoes, the pants, everything was handmade, laced up, done by artisans and people who basically did this every day for a living. And needless to say, the quality was phenomenal. This stuff did not fail. Unlike today, you have to deal with, the bottom falling off your factory made shoe. Back then, you resold the shoe. Kind of still do it with cowboy boots, but I digress. Just being able to see the way things were done. Now, something that really got my attention was the medicine. The way medicine was done back in that day, they actually had a mock up of a field hospital. Now, back in the day, the railroad had so many injuries because there was really no worker safety protocol that they actually found it easier to simply bring surgeons, nurses, and doctors, and they built a hospital in Temple. Originally, it was the railroad hospital. It's now the city hospital. It's grown. It actually burned down. I believe at one point was rebuilt, and basically the entirety of that medical infrastructure in that city was built around the railroad providing medical care for the workers and for their families. You also get to see a lot of the metal smithing stuff that they used, as well as the luggage, which basically included suitcases and trunks that were made of wood. It basically was a big box with leather handles that you put your stuff in and hoped it showed up intact on the other side. They had examples of all of this. They also had examples of the mirrors of the time, how people dined. And seeing this kind of stuff makes me wonder, are you prepared to use metalsmithing tools? Do you know how to use hand tools? A lot of us nowadays have become so dependent on third partying out, we don't know how to do a lot of the skilled labor that was done back in that day. I did get a kick out of the old school blood pressure machines and the gurneys that they had available for us to look at. So again, something to think about. Getting competent with the basics of medicine, whether it's herbal, Western, or Eastern medicine, to understand how they come together, how they can heal. Because in an emergency, we don't know what medicine we're going to have available. Of course, they also had an amazing mock-up of the city of Temple during World War II. Now, Temple was a staging area for a lot of the armored divisions that were going out to Europe. And they have a mock-up. I believe it's HO scale, train, as well as Sherman tanks, half tracks, all sorts of World War II stuff, where they demonstrate and then have plaques to explain what you're looking at as far as the historical context of that time. Keep in mind, World War II, the entire country was contributing to the war effort, and that's something that for generations we have not seen. Up until World War II and World War I, wars were fought overseas, and ever since then, they're fought elsewhere. The USA has not seen war or a wartime effort truly come to its shores the way we did during World War II. The mock-up was phenomenal. It reflected the city. I even went and found some of those old buildings that were in the model, and they're absolutely cool. So it does give you a lot of context about the way things were in that day. But again, if the U.S. were to go to war, if we had an economic collapse, would your community, would your mag be able to know what to do, not only to survive, but to exist in that kind of society? There were also a lot of demos and exhibits showing old tools, the way the stores were set up. A lot of things like pulley wheels that a lot of people take for granted now, how they use the pulleys and the iron tools to leverage and lift much heavier objects than you could have by hand alone. A lot of people don't understand the mechanical advantage you get using levers, using pulleys. Also, the blacksmithing shop that they had mocked up was just phenomenal. I don't know enough about blacksmithing to speak to it, but it was very cool to witness. Of course, no museum in Texas would be complete without a dedication to the World War II effort, and they have a whole section dedicated to showing how the tanks, equipment, and troops were transported through Temple to the various docks in Galveston, Houston, New Orleans, even out in Florida and on the East Coast, so that they could deploy and go to war with the Nazis overseas. Now, they did have some things which were interesting. For instance, one poster said, "Millions of troops are on the move. Is your trip necessary?" Could we be heading into that kind of environment where fuel is so scarce or so expensive You have to start thinking, is my trip necessary? Could I be saving money simply staying at home or working local, dealing with local providers of goods? Have you researched what resources are in your area so you don't have to make long trips? Of course, they also have some more old paraphernalia, uniforms. All Aboard for Victory was one poster that was there. And it makes you realize and appreciate the sacrifices made by past generations that truly we take for granted today. And again, if you saw my Holocaust Museum video, you probably would understand that these times, this time frame of history all happened at the same time. So over there, people were dying in camps, and over here, we were trying to teach people to conserve their resources, to be smart, to reuse, to repurpose, and to source locally so you didn't use the fuel during the war effort. So a lot of interesting things. They also have an entire section dedicated to the various types of freight trains. They explain the types of trains, their purpose, what they were used for. They also talk extensively about the signaling, the use of flags, the use of lanterns, the use of lights of different colors to communicate across distances in the daytime or in the dark. And it makes you think about ways we can communicate when there's no radio, when there's no phone, when there's no light. Stuff we should all probably think and learn, but really cool things to witness. Of course, they had the ever-present cast iron or pot-bellied stove. It was a beautiful exhibit. It was an amazing piece they had there. And they explained how the stoves serve multiple purposes, not just for cooking, but for heating, for light at times at night. It was truly the center of any workplace or home in Texas back then during the war, and in the 1800s for sure. They also have a display with all the types of signal lights, how they were used, what they were used for, the types of signals and messages you would transmit so that trains wouldn't collide in the dark. Because keep in mind, they didn't have cell phones, they didn't have internet. They just assumed, according to the book, the train was supposed to arrive at this time from this place. And if it didn't, well, nobody knew where it was. So the trains would communicate so they didn't crash into each other in the middle of the night. One example is there's a plaque that says the railroad used a wide variety of lamps, including semaphore lamps, classification, train order lamps, bridge lamps, marker lamps, switch lamps. Lamps generally had a sheet of metal or cast metal body and used lenses to amplify the light source. And they were intended for use around the tracks. So really cool things to think about. Makes me wonder if I should go get one of those old oil lamps with the different colored films on it. And they also, of course, had a more modern exhibit where they actually show the computer-generated model of some of the trains going to and from today. So you can kind of see how the trains are interacting, how they're controlled, how the various switches and tracks are being used to bypass one train from the other. Again, really cool information. A lot of interesting stuff. The exhibit went on. It took me, when I went through there, at least a couple hours. I did like the Santa Fe light colors. They displayed this. It was 5 lights, and sadly I can't remember exactly, but the lights used in combination each had a different meaning. So like you put a blue light, it meant one thing, but a blue with a green meant something else. A blue with a red or a yellow with an amber meant different things. And these are how these folks communicated over great distances in the dark. Really phenomenal stuff to learn. And of course they had the ever-present Morse code machine, the telegraph machine, along with the American Morse code, something I think Americans have lost. And I think it probably, the way things are going, wouldn't be a bad thing to think about. Behind the building, they had a bunch of old trains on displays. Some you could go into, some you had to look at. But overall, it was a really neat experience. I learned a lot about how they did things back in the day. You know, I deal with convoys, I deal with logistics as an engineer in today's society. and it's nothing like what these folks went through. So it's really mind-blowing to see all this. I thought it was very cool. If you're ever in Temple, Texas, I would highly recommend going there. Of course, you go downtown. They have a lot of great restaurants, including a couple of little Italian and Polish places that have been there since 1860. So these are old restaurants that were kept in the family. It was really cool to see the history, to talk to folks who are the great-great-grandchildren of some of the people on this railroad project. And it makes you wonder, could we do those things again? Could we go back to that way of communicating and be effective? A lot of it's going to be a question of, can we keep an open mind about what we learn if things get turned off on us? So folks, I just wanted to share this one with you. This was kind of lighthearted. It wasn't a dark video. I know my Holocaust Museum, a lot of people, that was a very serious subject. This was super interesting, and I learned a lot. If I get to Temple again in the future, I'm going to make another trip. I might even do a live stream if they give me permission to, from the museum, where I can get one of the curators to come and tell us about the museum. But if you're in Central Texas, I highly recommend you attend, you go to this, maybe get a tour. They weren't giving tours the day I went, but the tours are really cheap. It's like $5-10, and they explain everything. And then you go about and get lunch or dinner, depending on what time of day it is. But folks, things to think about. Can we do what they did 100 years ago today? Do we have not only the skill, but do we have the heart to do those things? So we'll see how that goes. But until next time, folks, God bless, Godspeed, be safe out there, and I look forward to seeing all of you on the next video. Take care.